You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Okay, so we're here with Sheila Coronel and Jaemark Tordecilla. And as you know, Sheila, I have to take advantage of these times kasi si Sheila comes home from Columbia University in New York maybe once or twice a year. And so you have to grab her while you can.
Well, you grabbed me, Roby. I'm here.
So welcome once again. Welcome home.
Yes, thank you.
I won't get into why you're here. Every time Sheila comes home, if you ask her, then she'll have to kill you. But she's always on a mission. But I wanted to grab you, as I said, kasi first gusto kitang kamustahin. How are things in the United States, in New York? You're coming home at a particular moment where even for Filipinos watching what's happening in the United States, parang ang weird.
Weird ba? Or does it not seem very familiar to you?
Well, that's precisely it. It's familiar to us, but I think Filipinos will say, dito mangyari, that's par for the course, sanay na tayo dyan, di ba? We've looked at despots, we've looked at dysfunctions, we've looked at, I'll just throw everything here that I want to ask later on. The lack of checks and balances.
The suppression of the academe.
The fear that we perceive it. And yun, so parang I think kung dito, I know where your question is coming from, dito, it's not weird looking at it now in the United States, especially knowing people like you being there, diba? That part feels weird.
It seems very familiar to me because I've been here before. When I grew up during the martial law era and all the restrictions, the rise of strongmen, the suppression of thought and speech, they're all very familiar to me. But I did not expect it in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Right? Because the United States has a 250-year-old tradition of democracy. We are a young democracy, a young, very challenged democracy. So one would expect these kinds of, going between liberal democracy to competitive autocracy because we're still building democratic institutions. But the United States, you would think that after 2.5 centuries of building democracy, being one of the first democracies on the planet, that these institutions, the checks and balances, would be more firmly established. And we've seen that in the last less than a year, remember the Trump presidency was officially inaugurated only in January. What month?
It's only been 7 months.
It's only been 7
half a
months.
year.
It's been like 6+ months of a presidency that has managed to erode those institutions and the checks and balances. But I don't think Trump did this single-handedly. I think the makings of this crisis go a long way back. And there are economic reasons, there are political reasons why this is happening. In a sense, Trump is at the end of a long chain of events and trends that are happening not just in the U.S., but globally, that undermine democracy, that undermine free speech, etc., etc. Trump just happens to be there at a particular conjuncture that is very suited. He is a man for this moment, and he's definitely ruled this moment.
Oh, but
Yeah.
that part, I think, how we got here, more or less, I think people understand what you're saying. You look at Europe, for example, there was that shift to the right a long time ago prior to this. I've read articles tracing this particular moment back to the rise of Newt Gingrich, post-Reagan, diba? But what's weird to me is the response or the lack of it. Nadali mo when you said na the tradition has been there. But it's the institutions that I really would have thought that the institutions would have held. I guess you could say it's still holding. It's there, but the people who should be taking advantage of it, pulling levers and leveraging against it, would be more proactive in pulling those
Yeah, definitely. But I think the lesson here, and it's a lesson we know very well, your constitution will not protect you. Your institutions will not protect you. When it comes to multiple challenges at all times, these protections are only as good as the existing norms to respect those institutions and those laws, that those norms are almost universally followed.
So what people are saying that ang style lang ni Trump is just ignore it. Just ignore the rules, ignore the institution, do what you want, and then let them catch up to you if they can.
But isn't that...
That is, in fact, the playbook?
Isn't that very familiar to us? Didn't Marcos do the same thing? Didn't Duterte do the same thing? So the use of executive power to undermine the other branches of government, to intimidate, to persuade, to whatever. Plus, we are also, I think what's different here is we are in a very changed media and information landscape where institutions and individual people in power are very vulnerable to assaults from massive disinformation, whether that's organic or not, but from this whipping up of populist sentiments that justify and make possible the assault on the law, the assault on institutions.
Yeah. We want to get back on the media, right? But I want to touch on your point about the attacks on institutions. And you're part of an institution that was ground zero last year for those attacks, even before Trump happened, which is Columbia University. We all heard about the protests and the suspensions, and now repercussions brought on by the federal government. What was your view of that whole episode when, it used to be the Ivory Tower in Morningside Heights, but apparently, kung Wakanda yun, na-breach yung force field ng Wakanda sa inyo.
So I was watching this literally at our doorstep of my building, Pulitzer Hall, where the journalism school is. You know this, Roby. You've been there. All of these things were happening. I could watch it from the windows of our classrooms. All the protests.
It's usually a very beautiful view from your office.
It's a beautiful view with the quad in the campus, but I've seen the encampment there lasting for several weeks. I saw the New York police invading, really 1,000 strong. I've been through martial law. I have not seen 1,000 well-armed policemen invading a small campus with drones, with helicopters, with heavy machinery, to crash through the buildings. I have never seen anything like it. Against unarmed. Some of those students actually are as small as me. And because I saw them fleeing. A lot of them were Asians and students of color. And really I never thought I would see this happen. The police had not come to Columbia since 1968. Yeah, so all of us were surprised that something like this would happen. But that was the result of all of this heightening rhetoric and making it look like a crisis that it was not.
Yeah. Looking at that, if you saw the pictures and the videos, parang peaceful yung protest. We've been to UP, we've seen the mob, protests there. That was nothing like a UP protest. So medyo...
It was like a picnic.
It was.
Actually, they had a lot of food coming in. They had a coffee table, and you had a choice of oat milk, almond milk, skimmed, or whole milk. It was a very civilized protest. People were doing art, art classes, they were doing dance classes, they were doing poetry readings, there was even a Passover Seder there where people were praying. So it was really more like, how do you say it? The early days of Occupy Wall Street or the umbrella protests and some of this velvet revolution, or like People Power, where people were there.
There were Jewish students there.
There were a lot of Jewish students there. Okay. There was a lot, and some of the most vocal protesters were Jewish students. Yeah. So this is why the accusations of anti-Semitism are it's really using anti-Semitism as a wedge, as the wedge to drive home repression of free speech in the guise of anti-Semitism.
I mean, ako certainly I wouldn't belittle the form of the protest. At the end of the day, that is a protest. That is defiance. No? And gaya ng sabi mo, nagulat ka. You were surprised to see the response of the government in particular, sending in thousands of troops. But nagulat ka ba in your sense of the fight? I don't know how you would characterize it, on whether or not it actually waned. The appetite to fight actually waned. In other words, was it effective? This intervention and this decision to deal with it with brute force. Nagulat ka ba with how Americans have been responding, both as citizens and also as institutions? You take media, you take civil society,
The academia.
and even the entertainment industry.
Well, you must understand that the U.S. has a history of suppressing dissent. Kent State, remember the anti-Vietnam War protests. The protesters were killed, even if those were largely peaceful protests. Of course, we are familiar with the civil rights movement, which was nonviolent, but still the suppression of it was very violent. I mean, you've seen the movies, you've watched Selma. Mm-hmm. So this is really, if you look at the long arc of even contemporary U.S. history, this is not new. I think what's new here is the manufacturing of a crisis of anti-Semitism, what I think is a non-existent crisis that has been whipped up by very right-wing and elements of the political establishment as an excuse to suppress free speech and so-called woke culture in universities. What we didn't see in the beginning last year or 2 years ago when all of this was playing out was that there was a larger and more strategic agenda. And the agenda is ideological and it's cultural. It's like a cultural revolution from the right that wants to suppress the woke liberal agenda when it comes to race, gender, climate,
Class.
and also the idea of government as, providing services and protection to the people. So it is really a right-wing agenda that is at play now, and we didn't see it then. It's become clear now that universities are seen to be at the cutting edge and as the promoters and as the nurturers of this liberal woke agenda. And the idea is to kill that you can call it what they call it, a brainwashing. They call it the brainwashing in elite, especially in elite universities. And that accounts for also the same thing with Hollywood, because these are seen as the culture makers, the leaders of how people think. So universities, media, and entertainment are seen as the centers of woke culture. And the idea is to suppress them and to convert them into being what they call viewpoint diversity, which is actually, again, the use of language to actually mean one viewpoint rather than diverse viewpoints. Yeah.
When did you figure this was systematic rather than just yung individual attacks on institutions?
I think Project 2025. Before the elections, before the Trump election, during the campaign, the Heritage Foundation had been years in the making trying to develop an alternative agenda for how government, and not just government, for how the country should be run. And it's all in Project 2020.
And it started with lawfare, diba? Started with them making sure that their appointees make it all the way to the Supreme Court and the federal
It's a long process of trying to invade the courts. Yeah. Starting with appointments at in federal courts and in state courts, so that you have very conservative judge. You fill the bench with conservative judges and also with state and local legislatures, filling this with conservative candidates. So it's from building it from the ground up. It's really systematic. Yeah.
But for the longest time, when it comes to appointing whether liberal or conservative judges to the bench, it always felt like, it's more of a defense, on your side of the ideology than anything. Just make sure that they don't swing too far to the right or too far to the left. But now it's now on the offense. Parang it's a moment where the administration and the incumbent can actually wield the judiciary to go on the offense.
Well, to be fair, many judges have ruled against Trump. They have not all ruled against Trump. They brought back funding to certain agencies. They've reversed certain immigration restrictions. The Supreme Court, however, is very different. The Supreme Court is largely a conservative court. There are 3 liberal judges and maybe 2 swing judges, so it's very hard. So all the Trump policies eventually end up in the Supreme Court. And it's very rare. It's not always. It's rare when the Supreme Court rules against what the Trump government wants to do. Yeah.
Given all of that, what does fear look like? And how is it familiar? How is it similar? And also, how is it different from what you've experienced here and what you're seeing there?
I think it's the same. You don't know where the red lines are. So, for example, the agreement that Columbia University entered into with the federal government in order for Columbia to get back the government grants, hundreds of millions in government grants that were suspended supposedly because of anti-Semitism. That agreement defines anti-Semitism as anything that is against the state of Israel. So it's a real dilemma. What is against the state of Israel? So, for example, one of the faculty members, who's a genocide scholar and teaches the Holocaust, says, she asked this, can I still teach Hannah Arendt? Because Hannah Arendt is against the idea of Israel. Will that be considered anti-Semitic to teach her text, The Trial of Eichmann, which is a classic? Will it be considered anti-Semitic to discuss that text? We don't know. We don't have any guidelines, but we do know that there is an internal disciplinary mechanism where charges of anti-Semitism can be heard. So if somebody complains, if a student complains that an instructor is anti-Semitic because of the text that she is teaching, then that instructor can be called to a disciplinary hearing. Yeah. And in fact, Columbia is paying damages to individuals, to the government for anti-Semitism, and to individuals who claim that they have been subjected to anti-Semitic attacks.
And in the meantime, in the absence of guidelines, you'll just self-censor.
But we know this very well, right? During the Marcos era, you don't know where the red lines are. I mean, I was in the Bulletin, I was in Panorama magazine at that time. You never know when you cross the red line. So, for example, when Benigno Aquino was assassinated, we had a small feature, 2 pages, with some small pictures of people lining up to pay respects to Ninoy Aquino when he was laid out in Santo Domingo. The owner of the Bulletin decided that was too provocative. At that sensitive time, all 300,000 copies of the magazine were not distributed.
Wow. But it was printed?
It was printed because we have advanced printing. You start printing like on a Thursday or a Friday for the Sunday edition. Yeah. Oh, I still remember. This is a story. I wasn't in the Bulletin then, but this was around 1978. Panorama magazine did a survey of the youth, UP and elsewhere, asking them, who are your heroes? Imelda Marcos was below Joe Masison. And so what happened was they already distributed, because as you know, sometimes, this was the era of print, right? Some of those magazines were already distributed on the Saturday morning. Saturday night, 2 truckloads of soldiers went to the Bulletin printing press and seized all the magazines so that they could no longer be distributed. And the troops retrieved the copies that had already been distributed in Parañaque and Pasay and the southern part of the city.
If any copy survived, if anyone listening has a copy that survived, that
In Parañaque, in
Parañaque in particular.
But that's what I mean. You don't know where you cross the red lines. I mean, the people in Panorama knew that, this was a censored press, but they didn't know the sensitivities. It's very personal. Same thing with Trump. Who would have thought that an interview with Kamala Harris that you edited would have prompted Trump to file a libel suit that said you edited that to make her look better? As you know, you're in TV and in radio, all interviews are edited, right? But CBS settled for $16 million. Is that a red line? We don't know. So we don't know what the red lines are. We don't know what will upset the president. When the Wall Street Journal recently printed a story about how Trump had sent a body card to Epstein with the drawing of a naked woman, Trump sued the Wall Street Journal, and
which was owned by Rupert Murdoch, who also owns Fox News, who's a very pro-Trump outlet.
Yeah. So is that a red line? Anything that Trump sends to Epstein? I don't know, but Epstein, of course, is a very volatile topic. But Trump now wants Murdoch to testify in court, right? It's really a provocation because Murdoch is like close to 90 now. Yeah. So really, no one is safe. If Rupert Murdoch is not safe, if CBS is not safe, and if, as you know, they also cut funding to public media, PBS and NPR, if they're not safe, what more a small investigative nonprofit?
Yeah. But when you say that people are not safe, it's a sense of not being safe, diba? Because do they not, notwithstanding everything that we discussed about the institutions, do they in fact not feel like that the institutions and the Constitution in particular will still have my back? You look at the CBS sale, for example, and Stephen Colbert calling it a bribe, and then eventually Stephen Colbert being cancelled also. But the counter to all of that, and the rage and the outrage of everybody, was saying that how hard could it be to fight this in court? Diba? How hard could it be to have a court dismiss this case? So are you saying that when people don't feel safe, they are in fact saying, no, we are losing faith even in the institutions?
Checks and balances.
I think it's not so much losing faith in the institutions, but they fear repercussions if they go all out against Trump. And those repercussions may be, even just being trolled by Trump on social media and by his millions of followers. That's something. Would you like that for yourself? But also,
well, we all got trolled by Duterte for 6 years.
Yeah, but didn't that have a chilling effect?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
That's my question. And yeah, that's my point then. Parang chilling effect comes in different ways. We're all in media, and we all know the bravado that comes with it. But I keep telling people, sometimes the fear is not for myself. Like I look at Rafi Tima and I'm thinking, di ba, parang he's thinking, baka bastusin yung wife ko in Malacanang, which actually happened. You'd never know kung sinong biglang idadamay ni Duterte.
And also to your point, Roby, you've been making this point for years that the weak spot of Philippine media is the ownership, usually, diba? And now we're seeing that movie play out in the U.S.
Yes, CBS settled because they were about to merge with Paramount, and they didn't want regulators.
About to be bought by Skydance.
Yeah, they didn't want the regulators to interfere in whatever business arrangements they were making. And they didn't want Trump to, the president has influence, even if cannot pressure people, but the president has influence and can delay the deal. The deal can be questioned by the president's supporters in Congress. So life could be made difficult. So yeah, the vulnerable point is the ownership. ABC is owned by Disney. Disney has lots of other businesses. So they figured it was cheaper and easier to settle. Yeah. So yeah, the weak point, the Achilles heel of media everywhere is the ownership. PBS is government funded, and its Achilles heel is its government funding. But I don't think PBS or NPR are going to give up, are going to make arrangements. But that's the hard reality of media, and even independent media is subjected to pressure because you can be sued. There can be pressure on the foundations that fund you, or the individual donors that can fund you. So all of us are vulnerable. It has always been the case. But the norm, the democratic norm, is that media should be left alone. That there are existing laws that would rein in the abuses. Yeah. No, I don't know of any U.S. president who has actually sued a news organization, except for Trump. Yeah.
The other thing, nabanggit mo yung trolling, and you asked me, ikaw ba gusto mo bang matroll? I feel that during the time of Duterte, in particular, at this particular juncture, that we're losing our audience, we're losing our reach. The other thing that Duterte capitalized on, and that I think is happening in America now, is it also plays not just on the fear of going bankrupt or the fear of getting sued. It's also the fear of just being mocked into irrelevance. No, and then I think even with the current president, making a decision lang na, I won't talk to the media. He doesn't have to insult us. Diba? But just saying the content creators are more important to me. Diba? And I don't even need to take any interviews from anyone. The ultimate fear for us in this day and age is irrelevance. Yeah? And you throw in everything else, technology, AI, and so on. And then, kung ito na nga lang yung pinangahawakan ko, mawawala pa sa akin, alaskado ka pa. Diba? That's part of the...
And it's a movie we saw in 2022 in the Philippines. Bongbong Marcos won the presidency without taking a single critical question from mainstream media. Diba? And he ended up prioritizing, his own network of information. Diba? So, irrelevance talaga yung kalaban natin. But I wanted to touch on one of your points about Trump's influence. Sa Pilipinas kasi, expected na yun. Feeling ko nga, diba, yung superpower ng mga politiko sa Pilipinas, yung kapal na muka. Talagang, I'll go through with what I want to do. Norms be damned. We're seeing that playing out also in the U.S. now. Unlike before where there were lines, you see MAGA congressmen harassing people. Bastusan na talaga, diba? When did that start? And how does the information ecosystem give cover to them to be able to do that? Kasi kahit ano sabihin nila, may rest back sila.
We've definitely seen coarsening of the political discourse. And I think part of that has to do with the fact of social media. A large part of it is because social media does not allow for the same kind of thoughtful and nuanced discourse, because it's one-liners, it's images, it's visuals, it's memes.
Owning the libs.
Exactly. And so there's a theory that says the kind of media you have determines the kinds of politicians you have. So the theory is that JFK famously was elected president at the time of television. So there was a premium on the ability to speak to a TV audience. You have to be young, good-looking, but also eloquent in a way.
And think on your feet.
And the ability to think on your feet, which would not have been in the time of text or even radio. So they're saying that in the time of social media, and we'll see this, the type of politician that survives is the ability, like Duterte we saw, the ability to have a louder and
just built for sound bites. As ridiculous as it is, you're just built for it.
Not even the sound bites of TV, because that was already true in the TV era, but the ability to be in that exchange of
in the mimification of politics.
So that affects everyone because you have to rise above the rest, right? And what makes you rise above the rest is either something sensational, something violent, something different, something coarse, or something that makes people cry. Right? So that is incentivized. That kind of speech is incentivized. And the kind of thoughtful and podcasts are different.
How do you teach it now? I mean, Columbia University, you're with the Stabile Center for Investigative Journalism in particular. Diba? So how do you teach it now? When you have to start with the question and the premise na, kaya nyo bang makipagsabayan? Diba? You're generating these investigative pieces, you're interviewing so many people, you're gathering the data, the information. In the meantime, the enemy or all the players, even if you don't call them the enemy, all the good players in politics,
good faith.
even good faith are just having to reduce things to 30-second sound bites and then move on to the next thing the next day. So how do you teach it now?
Well, for investigative reporting, it's rather different because we don't have to be part of that day-by-day war of words. I think if you have original and deep reporting, you still manage to break through the sound barrier in a way with original, deeply thought out and well-told stories. So there are countless examples of where original exposés are able to break through the sound, through the noise, and through all of that. Because people still respect, at the very bottom, they still respect well-documented, well-reported journalism that provides information that helps them make sense of what is happening all around them.
What's your... Is there...
When you say people, who are you talking about?
Is there any favorite piece recently that comes to mind that made an impact that off the top of your head?
For example, the whole Epstein investigation started out as the product of a Miami Herald reporter because all of that was taking place in Florida. And that broke through national, and even now we're seeing the tail of that investigation making an impact because it exposed Epstein's relationship with power and with very high profile and high powered individuals. The Elon Musk investigations that showed his links to government funding, the way his companies are being run, that, because people invest in his companies. So there is an incentive for people who are buying his shares of stock to know what's really going on inside Tesla, inside SpaceX, and all of that. So all of these big companies have been subjected to investigations precisely because they are big, publicly listed companies, and everyone who has a stake in them, I invest in a retirement fund. I want to know what my retirement fund is investing in, and if it's investing in Facebook, I have a stake in knowing what's going on in Facebook. So exposés that have to do with power and money, there will always be an audience because the stakes are so high, even for individuals.
I think it's similar to what happened with us during the Duterte administration while they held all the power and media wasn't being believed, right? But there was still value in putting things on record, putting the truth on record, so that when later on, when a day of reckoning comes, may record dito. Ito yung nangyari.
Yeah, that's one of our functions, is to just record what's happening in the hope of future accountability. I started out with an underground newspaper during the Marcos era. We printed 500 copies by hand with a silk screen, but we always made sure that a copy got to the library.
What's that silk screen?
Silk screen is for making... Silk screen, you type it out on stencil.
What's stencil?
Type it out on stencil. It's the same thing, the same process used for making T-shirts. So you print it out, you silk screen one page, you let it dry, then you silk screen the opposite page. We had 500 copies of it by hand, but we always mailed a copy to the head librarian of UP in the hope that they will keep it for the future. They did. And so now that whole underground archive has been made public. It's been digitized. It's not digitized, but microfilmed, and it's been indexed. And people writing about the Marcos era use that archive because otherwise they would only have the archive of the controlled press. And so that archive is still useful.
Even in today's fast-paced world, you look at a film like Sabongeros. And I remember last year, they couldn't even get it shown. Literally couldn't get a permit from the MTRCB, and even if they did, no cinema would touch it. Not even a festival, di ba?
That was the biggest
that was the big, di ba? But the fact that it got made sure it was its own assurance that people will see the light of day, and people will see it. And so people ask me, ano bang endgame dito sa Sabongero? Sabi ko, hindi ko rin alam. We're still going to be in the hands of the politicians. For all we know, this is still somebody's design for 2028, di ba? Panira yan, and may alas ako sa certain people. But you cannot take away the fact that at the end of the day, this was an independent production. And to your point, the fact that it got printed, the fact that somebody recorded these stories and bothered to chronicle the voices of victims was its own assurance that one day these voices are going to get heard, and one day these faces are going to get seen.
You know how historians write history is this based on archives, on what was recorded in the past. If there is no record, then your view of history would be very one-sided. So the power of the archival power, is something we don't usually think about. But archival power means historical power. That means power over how the future is going to be written. This is why I think the Marcoses have such power, because they have all the videos, all the photographs, everything. They have archival power. And so that is one thing we should be considering when we think about, if we're recording for the future, where is our archive? But let me just say that this story's breakthrough, just recently, the PCIJ reported a story about how San Miguel Corporation was trying to take over this island that's traditionally been the home of indigenous peoples in Palawan. Demto Anda, who's a Palawan-based reporter, wrote that story. If that story was not written, San Miguel would have succeeded in taking over that island. But San Miguel, because of the publicity, has since withdrawn. That's impact. That's impact at the local level. And I think sometimes we should be focusing more on local stories where we can have real impact. Okay, we write about dynasties, but the truth is that that's a generational thing. It will not change in my lifetime probably, but it's important to archive it there for the future. But you can make impact at the local level on small stories where governments and corporations can be shamed into not doing something.
We went to BARM the last year, and we did a scan of independent media there, and it's practically non-existent. I mean, a lot are really struggling, community papers especially. But you also met a lot of journalists, former ABS-CBN, former Inquirer, or even former community paper, community radio, and wala nang home base. And now when you ask them, what are you going to do? A lot of them say, I've moved on to the NGO, I'm teaching, I'm doing my business, and so on. But every so often, I'll just do it on my own. And then I asked, ano ibig sabihin ng you'll do it on your own? Basically, they'll do the journalism the way they know how, and then they'll just post on Facebook. But that very act, they said, does have impact. We tend to think that impact is measured in terms of, page, not even page views. We measure it in terms of engagement. We measure it in terms of these cold numbers that analytics will give us. But tama ka eh. The impact of journalism can be, just getting to the right people. And somehow people will react. Well, to use a current term, may hiya pala, di ba? Parang
naming and shaming still works. Yeah. And now you have social media. You don't have to publish in a news site. You don't have to be in the radio. Social media has the capacity to name and shame as well. That's the good side of social media. Of course, there's the bad side where it can be used for disinformation. But yeah, I think naming and shaming as a traditional function of investigative reporting is still important.
Siguro to end this conversation, because you have a hard out din. Prescription. From the past couple of years, what lessons have you learned and how can we apply that here for local media?
What have I learned? One is you really need to know your audience and how to talk to them. And before, PCIJ just relied on syndication of articles and because the media was so small and so contained, you would expect impact. But now I think you have to know your audience. In order to make impact, you have to know your audience and you have to know what kinds of stories make an impact. The other thing is technology is developing at such a fast pace that I am worried about the future of journalism as we know it. And so we must be strategic in our thinking on how best to use technology as it is evolving for the purpose of creating an information ecosystem where we have our voices heard. And I don't know what "our" means. Is it journalism as we know it? But I think there has to be a space, and we have to carve out that space and claim the space of fact-based, evidence-based, independent reporting or information gathering. How we do that, I think it takes a whole of society approach. It is not just the journalism community, but citizens and other elements of society have a stake in preserving that space. Otherwise, our information ecosystem will be full of toxic sludge. How do we preserve the non-toxic, independent space where people can, the whole concept of a public sphere? How do we recreate that in a news ecosystem that's poisoned by disinformation and where AI-produced news is probably going to inundate that? Yeah.
Sundot na lang, and then we'll thank you. Dun sa sinabi mo. You think we're too caught up and too much hanging on to the term journalism and journalists?
And
news for that matter?
I think we are too caught up in thinking about news and journalism in the old way. I think there's always going to be a need for independently produced, verifiable, evidence-based information. Whether that's journalism, whether it's going to be produced by journalists, does not really matter. But I think there will always be a need for information that people can trust so they know where to invest their money, how to spend their money, how their funds are being spent, and who they will vote for. There will always be a need for that, regardless of what technology is predominant. Yeah.
Okay. Sheila Coronel, we're here at the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, which Sheila founded, and she is still with the Stabile Center for Investigative Journalism at Columbia University in New York. Always a pleasure, Sheila. We will always making sure we will catch her again when she comes home. And Jaemark, maraming salamat din.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No dinosaurs in this podcast.
No dinosaurs.
Maraming salamat po.
That's it for this episode of Teka Teka. This episode was produced by me, Jyn Garcia, and engineered by Anthony Tobias. Jaemark Tordecilla is our editor-at-large. If you like how we do our conversations, follow us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. For more updates, we are also on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you for listening, and until next time.